In this video, I'm going to be explaining the reasons why Randy Brown and Ricky Simone are great bets this weekend. So stick around because we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of those fights from a betting point of view, showing you footage of all the fighters so you can kind of see how they match up stylistically and why those bets make sense. And I'm really hoping that both Ricky Simone and Randy Brown come through for us this weekend, because with the bets that I've been sharing on YouTube over the last few weeks, they keep going 1-1. So on last week's card, I said that I was betting Bulgarian and Radka. Radka looked good. Obviously, Bulgarian put in a strange performance, which many people think is a fixed fight. I'm going to be releasing a video on Monday or Tuesday next week, specifically about my opinion on fight fixing in the UFC. If I think there are, fights being fixed, how prevalent I think it is. So please come back to the channel on Monday or Tuesday and keep an eye out for that, because I do have some very strong opinions on it. Then obviously we bet Mackenzie Dern and Alexander Rakic. Dern looked great, did exactly what we expected her to do. Rakic was looking great and doing exactly what we expected him to do until he got sent to the Shadow Realm. And then Charles Oliveira and Janata Deniz. Oliveira came through for us big. He looked good, made it look very easy against Gamrot. Obviously Janata Deniz got dominated on the ground. So we've been going 1-1 on these last three events we put videos out for. So hopefully today, Randy Brown and Ricky Simone will go 2-0 for us. Hopefully we don't go 0-2. But Randy Brown, Ricky Simone, just like all these 6 fighters that we bet, were very good bets based on the information we had going into the fights. And as a result, hopefully we'll be able to make some money this weekend. If you want to make money most weekends, join my live betting group. We actually make a profit on 74% of UFC events, and we've maintained that consistency over 10 years, dating all the way back to February 2016. So you can see this is one of the greatest profit charts you're ever going to see in sports betting. We're in a very nice uptrend here. As you can see, we made 7 units of profit last month. And so if you want to make money almost every month of the year betting on the sport you love, join my live betting group. You will absolutely love it. The guys in the live betting group have been with me for years. There's a reason why people stick with me for years. I'm the best in the world at what I do. We make a profit on the vast majority of UFC events. And if you join and stick with it for the long term, give it 6 months, give it a year, you will make a lot of money live betting the sport you love. It's an absolute no-brainer. So many people watch these videos. So few of you give this a try, which is absurd to me, because I come here every week, share tons of knowledge with you guys, demonstrate my understanding of the sport on a very deep level, and you have an opportunity to make money betting this sport every week with me for a price that, to be honest with you, will pay for itself 10 times over with how well we performed over the last 10 years. What's particularly impressive about my performance and the level of consistency I'm able to produce is that we've never had a dip in 10 years. Our biggest drawdown was minus 14 units, which was here. That was due to a technical issue with stream latency. So in normal circumstances, we've actually never had a dip. All we've done is go up, all we've done is trend up. We've gone sideways a little bit here and there, but for the most part, it's been up only. And if it hadn't been for these technical problems we experienced in this period of time, we'd be making a profit on probably 76, 77, maybe 78% of months, because obviously we had few consecutive losing months here, which is very, very rare for us. So give the live betting group a try. Links in the description below to join us. It's an absolute no-brainer. When these spots fill up, which I think they will, because I'm about to launch a really cool new live betting system, the waiting list system goes in place, and then guys have to wait months to be able to join. We've got spaces now, we've got an opportunity to join. Don't blow it, because when the group is full, which it will be full sometime in the next few months, you'll probably regret joining and seeing the gains we're going to be making. So jump on board while you still can. It's one of those things, right? It's one of those things like Pokemon cards, right? Nobody wants the fucking rare Pokemon cards during a market downturn when the cards are cheap. Everyone wants to buy the best, most hyped, most popular rare Pokemon cards when that card's up 1,000% and it's already made the majority of its gains, and everyone's getting rich off the Pokemon cards they bought 3 years ago. Don't wait for things to fly. Don't wait for Bitcoin to be at 100 grand before you buy it. Buy it when it's cheap. Buy it when you're in these dips, because when we fly and we do this, which we will 100% will. We always have, we always will, and we're in a cheeky little uptrend now. When we fly, when we have the huge uptrend, you won't be able to join. You can join now. Get in early and experience those gains. What most people do, they wait for the huge run and then they join here when we've had the run, and then we have that cooling off period. So don't miss out. Join now and you won't regret it, because I'm fucking really good and you will make money almost every week because I'm a fucking monster. So now let's get into breaking down the main event of this weekend's card, which is going to be Gabriel Bonfim versus Randy Brown. You've seen from the title, you've seen from the thumbnail, you've seen from the Discord, I'm going to be betting Randy Brown this weekend. His odds have declined a little bit since I put the bet out on Brown a couple days ago, but we'll work off these odds just for simplicity because we've got the odds conversion tool here. So Gabriel Bonfim is a 1.56 favourite, which is going to be minus 179 for an implied probability of 64%. And Randy Brown is a 2.45 underdog, which is going to be plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. This, for me personally, is one of those fights where the odds are utterly absurd. For me, I would have the odds the other way round. I think Randy Brown should be in this odds range. I think he should be the favourite, and I don't really understand why Bonfim is the favourite here. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. If we bring up the fighter comparison tool, we can see that Bonfim is 7 years younger than Randy Brown. So that does give him a statistical advantage. Fighters that are 7 years younger than their opponents win around 67% of the time. However, Randy Brown is in his prime at 34 years old, and he's not really showing any signs of decline. He did get rocked a few times by Nicholas Dalby in his last fight, but Brown's always been the kind of guy that gets rocked a lot, so I wouldn't read too much into that. Bonfim, though, at 27, should be making big improvements from fight to fight. So there's more unknown upside in betting Bonfim, but at these odds, you'd literally need to have a fucking... You'd probably need a brain transplant to bet Bonfim at these odds. These odds are absurd. We can see that Brown has a 2-inch height advantage, a 6-inch reach advantage, which is very nice because he fights long and he knows how to use it, and also a 5-inch leg reach advantage, which is also very nice because when you start to compound these slight height and reach advantages together, the leg reach, the reach, and the height together, Brown's the far bigger man. And we know a reach advantage is a big advantage in a fight. 6 inches, it's a lot, and Brown definitely knows how to use it. In terms of the strikes landed per minute, they're about even, but from my perspective, I would give Brown a decent edge in that department just because Brown has faced a higher level of opponent than Bonfim. So, you know, had Brown fought the guys Bonfim has fought, you know, he would probably be landing much more per minute. Same goes for accuracy. Brown a little bit more accurate, nothing major. Bonfim better defensively, but again, this doesn't mean a whole lot because Randy Brown has fought a much higher level of opponent than Bonfim. So had they fought an equal level of opponent, I would imagine Brown would probably be better defensively because he uses his length a lot better. Cardio's a lot better. Footwork movement is a lot better. In terms of the grappling, Bonfim has a big advantage here. He shoots nice takedowns. Decent on the ground, and we know this is an area of weakness for Brown, which we'll get into in a moment. In terms of the strike distribution chart, virtually identical. It's a little bit surprising actually, these charts, and these charts are very useful from a betting point of view because before researching this fight, I would have the perception of Brown as being someone that uses his length well and throws a lot of range-finding strikes out there to chip away at the legs and the body. But the stats obviously show something very different, and they actually show he doesn't really throw many strikes to the legs or body at all. Collectively, only 22% of his strikes to the leg and the body, which is quite low for someone with Brown's body type because with those long legs, he does have an opportunity to chip away at the legs and body of his opponents and rack up volume, which he doesn't really do. Obviously, you know, 21%, 22% of strikes land into the body and legs. It was better than 10%, which is what some fighters have, but I would expect a lot more. I would like that strike distribution chart to reflect more 30-35% of strikes land into the legs and body for Brown. So that's not so good because in a boxing match, I don't favour him as much against Bonfim because Bonfim's not a bad boxer. He hits a lot harder than Brown. I think, you know, Brown's length is a big weapon for him here, and while he will do a good job of using it via the jab, you know, you can have a lot of success with your kicking game too, and it's a shame that he doesn't really seem to use it that much. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, both of them are reasonably well-rounded when it comes to skills, but in terms of the styles that they come into fights with, Bonfim mixes it up a lot better than Brown, so he'll strike and he'll grapple. Whereas it's very rare you'll see Brown shoot a takedown. He really wants to keep fights standing where he can use that footwork, that movement, that technical striking to chip away at you on the feet. And so Bonfim will try to take Brown down in this fight. We've seen from the stats that he's very aggressive at pursuing the takedown. He shoots an average of 4.03 takedowns per 15 minutes, which is very high, to be fair. That's well above average in the UFC. And so Brown will have to defend takedowns in this fight. But to be fair to Brown, his takedown defense is pretty good. You can see that, you know, 73% takedown defense is pretty good. And on top of that, Brown is pretty good at defending himself on the ground and working his way back up to his feet. Bonfim may have a lot of success with his grappling early on when they're both fresh, because early Bonfim is quite tanky, he is quite strong, he is quite physically imposing. He can probably drag Randy Brown down and overwhelm him on the ground. But as the fight wears on into the second, third, fourth round, I think Bonfim will really struggle to get this fight to the ground in the same way that he struggled to get Stephen Thompson down. You can see in the Thompson fight, he shot 14 takedowns and only successfully completed 5 of them, which is pretty poor, especially considering, in my opinion, Brown's takedown defense and ability to scramble back up to his feet is a lot better than Stephen Thompson's is. And I know that we should never use MMA math, but Stephen Thompson is obviously 42 years old, so he's well past his prime. And if Brown, you know, if Bonfim can struggle that badly against Stephen Thompson and barely scrape through a split decision, I actually think this was a really bad decision. I think Thompson won pretty clear. You know, imagine how much he may struggle against a guy like Randy Brown, who's absolutely going to be in his prime at 34 years old. Just imagine that. Just imagine that. Also, if you do like this tool, the UFC research tool, you can find it on my website. Come to MMABettingTips.com. Roll the mouse over where it says tools. You can get it here, UFC research tool. This is available to everyone. You can start researching the events coming up over the next few weeks if you want to. They're all in here, all the data, everything you need. I had to click the one fight where the data wasn't generated. There we go, that's better. The data gets updated all the time, so this will be getting scraped and populated 24/7. So, alrighty then. So, good fight. Definitely lean towards Brown. Bonfim with the advantage when it comes to grappling. How about striking? So when it comes to striking, this is really power versus volume. So Bonfim has major power, whereas Brown, even though the stats are quite close, Brown does throw a higher volume of strikes against like a decent level of opponent, whereas Bonfim has a lot of success getting aggressive and throwing a lot against a lower level of opponent. So I think in this fight you will see Brown outstrike Bonfim, even though the stats don't necessarily reflect that when looking at the volume numbers. But I think you'll see Brown get behind the jab, chip away at Bonfim. You'll see Bonfim walking Brown down, trying to draw him into big exchanges and try and catch him with big power punches, and he may have success with that early. Brown is a fighter that is a little bit chinny. He does get rocked, wobbled and dropped in every fight, almost every fight. So if he does get knocked out, what can you do? This fucking cage fighting. It's always funny when I recommend a bet like Alexander Rakic a few weeks ago, and he's doing great and he's doing everything I said he would do in the breakdown video, where he's mixing up his striking and grappling and he's going to the legs and he's using his length to chip away at Mirzakhanov. And then he just gets caught, brutally knocked out, and people are like, oh, you clueless fraud. How could you not have fucking seen into the future and known that he would get knocked out in a cage fight to the death where people get fucking knocked out all the fucking time? It's like saying, how could you go outside and get wet when it's raining? It's the fucking sport. It is a little bit funny to me. So if Brown does get brutally knocked out this weekend, you have been warned, he gets rocked a lot. That's just the way Brown is. He's one of these guys that's abnormally long and tall for the division. He does get dinged a lot. However, that's why they call it gambling. And we don't have a crystal ball, and we don't know if he's going to get knocked out this weekend. But stylistically, it's a good fight for him, because Bonfim's opportunity to score that knockout is probably quite small. It's a 25-minute fight. Randy Brown's got great cardio. Bonfim is known to slow down a lot as fights wear on. So if Brown can make it through the first couple of rounds, I think by the third round, looking at how flat Bonfim has looked in the third round against guys like Ange Lusa, Stephen Thompson, and Nicholas Dalby. Sorry, in round 2 he looked pretty fucking flat. In fact, he looked quite flat towards the end of round 1. If Bonfim looks as flat as he did in those matchups, which I've just mentioned, by the third round, maybe even the second half of round 2, I think a lot of that knockout power for Bonfim is going to be diminished, and then it'll be much easier for Brown to kind of dance around him, chip away at him from behind the jab, and even if he did get dinged with a big shot, by that point in the fight, hopefully Brown can take it much better than if he would get caught with a bomb in the first round when Bonfim is fresh. So this is a really, really good fight for Brown, in my opinion, because the way I look at this matchup is we're kind of following the same blueprint that we followed when we bet on Mackenzie Dern and also Charles Oliveira, where we know, or we knew going into those fights, that Dern would be able to push a pace that Jandiroba didn't have the cardio to keep up with. Therefore, if Jandiroba didn't finish Dern inside the distance, Dern would likely win. Same kind of formula with Oliveira. We knew in a 25-minute fight, Gamrot didn't have the cardio to go hard, didn't have the cardio to outwork Oliveira. Therefore, if Oliveira could just avoid getting finished early, he would likely win. We kind of used the same logic with Rakic, and it didn't work out because he did get knocked out in the first round, but the principle applies, and he was winning that fight and looking great against Mirzakhanov. Same principle applies where it's a very nice profitable strategy to use long term when you've got two guys, especially when they're at underdog odds or even money like Oliveira was. I mean, Randy Brown's a great bet this weekend because we know if Brown can just survive the first 2 rounds, it doesn't matter if he gets his ass handed to him. It doesn't matter if Bonfim dominates those first 2 rounds. So long as Brown can just stay alive in a 25-minute fight, it's very unlikely Bonfim will perform well in rounds 3, 4, and 5 if the Lusa, Dalby, and Stephen Thompson performances ran into go by. And we know Brown's a cardio machine. So if Brown can just hang in there for a couple of rounds, he stands a great chance of winning 3, 4, and 5, or even getting a late stoppage. So we're following the blueprint that enabled us to win bets on Oliveira and Dern. Brown's odds are better than Dern and Oliveira. I certainly feel more confident in Brown than I did Oliveira. I was extremely confident in Dern. If you go back and watch the video, you'll see why. And yeah, I just think Brown's a great bet this weekend. I really think he's a great bet. I think he is going to be able to weather the early storm, especially because the storm might not come. Bonfim might start slower and look to pace himself in a 25-minute contest. But I think Bonfim will hang. I think Brown will hang in there, drag Bonfim into deep water, and outstrike him very clearly. And to kind of show you the reason why I like Brown so much in this fight, let's play a little bit of footage. So I don't want to make this breakdown super duper long. So I will try and keep it as short, as brief, as quick as I can. But what we're going to be doing is focusing on how Bonfim looks in the second half of fights. I don't really want to show footage of Randy Brown looking amazing in the second half of fights because this breakdown will get really, really long if I do. But what we're really focusing on here is just showing you that Bonfim fades. And so in a 25-minute fight, that's an issue. And I think I said this when we bet Charles Oliveira and Mackenzie Dern, right? I would have passed on both Mackenzie Dern and Charles Oliveira in a 3-round fight. Because in a 3-round fight, they don't have as long to weaponize their cardio. In a 5-round fight, cardio really matters. Because those 4th and 5th rounds, you know, they're very, very difficult if you slow down, you know, in the second, which Jandiroba does, and Gamrot does, and Bonfim does, and Mirzakhanov does, to be fair. But guys get knocked out, right? Not a lot we can do about it. So what I just want you to pay attention to in this 3rd round with Bonfim is just how much flatness there is to him and how much sloppiness there is to him in this 3rd round. So he's standing quite flat-footed in front of a 42-year-old Stephen Thompson. And you can just imagine Randy Brown in here, you know, using his length, pumping the jab, chipping away at him, dancing around him, and most likely outstriking him by a pretty decent margin, I would imagine. So we'll just skip through the clinch work because we want to be paying attention to the body language, the footwork, the movement, the volume, the aggression of Bonfim, and just start to visualize how a younger, longer, more technical Randy Brown may do in these positions against Bonfim. You can see Bonfim now is trying to circle away and avoid engaging. That clinch work has tired him out a little bit. You can see his mouth is wide open and Thompson just pressuring him. And you can see Bonfim hasn't really thrown anything in the last minute because he's trying to recharge his batteries from that clinch work to try and to catch his breath and recover. He's literally thrown 2 punches in the last minute and a half and it's a big head kick there. So you can really see like the stylistic matchup, the stylistic dynamic between Brown and Bonfim, where Brown has got the volume and Bonfim is just going to look to load up and catch him with those big singular power shots. That's pretty much it. We can go into the next one. Let's take a look at the Lusa fight. So again, we'll go into the third round. You can just paint a bit of a picture. So we'll skip into round 3. Let's go into round 3. So again, skip in a minute. So just look at like the footwork, the movement, the body language, the volume of Bonfim. So quite flat-footed here. And again, if you're familiar with Randy Brown's style, you'll know he'll be light on his feet, pumping the jab out there, dancing around Bonfim, chipping away at him. Now, I don't want to make this breakdown super long, but he just kind of stood right in front of Lusa, mouth open wide, flatness to him, not really throwing a whole lot, pumping the jab out there. I do think Bonfim will do well in the first 2 rounds, but I think by the third, I just think Brown will be too technical for him. Especially you've got to consider that Bonfim is fighting in a phone booth here and is just kind of popping that jab out there. We know Brown won't be standing in front of him like Lusa is. Brown will be using his length, that 5-inch leg reach, that 6-inch arm reach to land on Bonfim from a position where Bonfim's going to have to come forward and cover a lot of distance to counter. So you can see nothing terrible about Bonfim striking in the third, but just a bit of a flatness to him. And I just think if Brown can make it to the third, this fight is likely to go really well for him. And then one more, try and keep this breakdown as fast as possible. If we go to the Dalby fight and we go into round 2, there we go. So this is midway through round 2. You can see mouth open wide, trying to back up and avoid engaging. But Dalby just walking him down, wearing on him. To be fair, Brown does like to spend a lot of time in the clinch as well, and we did see him tire a bit in the clinch against Thompson, and certainly in this Dalby fight. I mean, look, you can see him look up at the clock here. So there's 2 minutes 10 seconds left to go in round 2. Look, he looks up at the clock when they disengage. Watch this. So he kind of looks up at the clock. There we go. He's looking up at the clock there as if to say, oh fuck, how long more have I got to go here with this fucking Danish savage. What you do notice about this matchup is you can see Dalby's just standing right in front of Bonfim now. And when you make Bonfim work, you tire him out a bit. His shots just don't seem to have as much on them. You can see the arms look very tired, very heavy here. Now, I'm not saying Brown is going to push this kind of pace on Bonfim. Dalby's absolutely relentless here, but you've got to remember we're only in the second round here. Brown's got the ability to take Bonfim into rounds 3, 4 and 5, and I do think that 4th and 5th round could be huge for Brown. Because again, Dalby is fighting Bonfim in a range where Bonfim can land, right? In that phone booth range, right in front of him. Brown will do a much better job of using his length. Which may not wear Bonfim down as much as Dalby is. That is true. But at the same time, the fight's a lot longer, 25 minutes. So that is that. So yeah, from a betting point of view, for me personally, this is just a fight where I think, based on the odds, it's a no-brainer. If we look at the implied probabilities, I think at worst you've got to give Brown a 50% chance of winning this. At worst, for me, this is a 50-50 fight, because from my perspective, either Bonfim gets an early finish or Brown likely outworks him in 3, 4 and 5 to take a decision. So I personally cap Brown at about 60%. I do favour him in this matchup, but at worst, if you just give him a 50% chance of winning, that's still a 9% edge over the odds, which for me is a very, very nice margin. And so I take Randy Brown all day long, and hopefully he will come through for us. The one more thing I want to check is the over-under on this one. And I am building our very own odds comparison tool, which will be ready very soon. Yeah, the odds are declining quite a bit on Brown now, since we bet him the other day. So let's take a look. So the over 2.5 rounds, I do quite like that, you know. I do quite like over 2.5 rounds. It is in the even money odds range. I think Bonfim is likely to be a bit less aggressive early because he'll want to pace himself for the potential this one goes 25 minutes. So yeah, I do think over 2.5 rounds is an interesting one. In terms of the most likely outcomes for the props, I actually think it's Brown by decision. The odds aren't bad actually, 5.5 plus 450. So if you're looking to sprinkle a little bit of money on this fight to make watching him more interesting just for entertainment, Brown by decision might not be too bad. So I'm hoping you found that very useful. Let's move on to the next one. So now let's get into the fight between Joseph Morales and Matt Schnell. So I don't want to spend too long on this one. I don't want to waste your time. This is a very good stylistic matchup for Joseph Morales. I would be amazed if he were to lose this. He's a big favourite though, and his odds reflect that. At a 1.23 favourite, minus 429, those odds carry an implied probability of 81%. This means in order to get any value on Morales at all, you'd have to give him an 85% or better chance of winning. And whilst you could probably do that, to be fair, because he is very likely to win this, for me, there's just very little upside in placing bets like this, so I prefer to just avoid them. In a sport as chaotic as MMA, bad judging, bad refereeing, disqualifications, point deductions, bad weight cuts, injuries, fighters having off nights, I prefer just not to play that game. But Morales should win this fight easily. At this stage in their careers, Morales is just better than Schnell everywhere. I know if you look at the fighter comparison, there's not that big of an age gap between these two. Schnell isn't that old for 35 years old, but age is just a number. And in terms of miles on the clock, Schnell has tons and tons and tons of miles on the clock. He's one of those guys that gets rocked, wobbled or dropped in almost every fight, and he is on a decline. What I really like about Joseph Morales, he's very well rounded. He has good cardio, really good technical striking, and a very good ground game as well. Schnell has been able to grind out the odd win over the last few years in the middle of his steep decline, just because he's still a very dangerous submission grappler. His takedown offense isn't great. He's a bit weak off his back, but he has a very, very dangerous choking game. And so that's how he's been able to rack up wins against guys like Jimmy Flick and Suma Derji, because he's been able to kind of, you know, use his cardio and ground game to cause him problems on the ground and grind out wins. He's not going to be able to do that against Morales, because Morales won't slow down like Suma Derji and Flick did, and Morales is more than capable of defending himself on the ground. Now, that's not to say Morales can't get caught in a real nasty choke. Schnell does have an extremely dangerous choking game. His guillotines are top tier, some of the most dangerous in the division. But unless something crazy happens, Morales should dominate this fight both standing up and on the ground, and he should win very, very easily. In terms of the over-under on this one, unlikely this fight goes to a decision. you can see if we look at the fighter comparison tool that Schnell very rarely goes to a decision. He's only been to a decision once in the last 3 years, one time in his last 6 fights. So very unlikely this one will go to a decision, in my opinion. Unfortunately, the odds are going to reflect that, and you can see, pretty steep favourite odds on the fight to end inside the distance. Morales probably wins this by knockout. If we look at the props, the only prop I would consider would be Morales by knockout or TKO. And do you know what? The odds are pretty good on that. I'm guessing the odds are good on Morales to win by knockout or TKO because he is primarily a grappler. But his striking's not bad either. And Schnell's a tough fucker that won't be easy to submit. Jimmy Flick found that out the hard way. Jimmy Flick gassed himself out and burnt himself out trying to submit Schnell and causing problems on the ground. Far easier to get Schnell out of there by knockout. And Morales is aggressive on the feet with pretty decent striking. Yes, if you look at his record, you can see that, he's never knocked anyone out. He hasn't knocked anyone out in 8 years. But, at this stage in Schnell's career, he just can't take a shot like he used to. So Morales probably gets the job done pretty easily here. And I'd be very, very surprised if he lost. So I hope that helps you out with your bets this weekend. Now let's break down the fight between Muslim Salikhov and Uros Medic, which is a classic striker versus striker matchup, but this is old school versus new school. So Muslim Salikhov is a 2.27 underdog, which is plus 127 for an implied probability of 44%. And Uros Medic is a 1.64 favourite, which is minus 156 for an implied probability of 61%. So if we look at the fighter comparison, we can see that Uros Medic is 8 years younger than Salikhov, which statistically gives him around about a 68% chance of winning. And the age stats between guys like this in fights like this is really meaningful because we know this is a young man's sport, and the closer you get to 40, the more you're going to decline. Whereas 32 years old, Uros Medic is in his prime and he's going to be getting better and better from fight to fight. So Salikhov's declining, Medic should be improving, and that gives Medic a big statistical edge. He's got a slight reach advantage, a slight height advantage, slight reach advantage, slight leg reach advantage. You can see that he's much more active on the feet though. He lands 62% more strikes than Salikhov, which is pretty huge. Medic is very aggressive, but he does pay the price for throwing a very high volume of strikes because he does slow as fights wear on. He's also 11% more accurate, which is very nice. Salikhov better defensively though. Even at this stage in his career, he's better defensively. He's got good footwork, good movement from that Wushu Sanda background. Now, in terms of wrestling, both these guys are primarily strikers. Salikhov will shoot the odd takedown, but not very often. You can see he averages just 1 takedown per 15 minutes. Salikhov also has much better takedown defense than Medic, but Medic's takedown defense likely won't matter very much if Salikhov's not trying to shoot takedowns. So I think this will be a stand-up fight anyway, so this stuff isn't too relevant. In terms of the strike distribution chart, they're both quite similar. They do attack the legs and the body, and mix it up. They're not the kind of fighter that only targets the head, but you can see that Salikhov mixes it up a little bit more than Medic, not a whole lot, but he does go to the body in particular, 20% of the time, which is above average to be fair, and that's probably because with the Wushu Sanda background, obviously kicking is a big part of Wushu Sanda, and Salikhov does have a better kicking game than Medic. So in terms of how these two match up stylistically, again, unlikely we'll get any grappling. If there was grappling, I would give a big advantage to Salikhov. If we quickly bring up Medic's record, obviously we have seen Medic struggle pretty bad on the ground against Miktabek, Oralbai, and also Punahel Soriano. Although Salikhov isn't as good on the ground as someone like Oralbai, right? So, Medic did look quite difficult to take down early against Oralbai, and then Oralbai's persistent wrestling, his chain wrestling was able to kind of wear Medic down a bit and then take him down easily. Salikhov can't really do that. He's more of a single shot kind of grappler, and Medic, because he's athletic and has good balance and moves well, it'll be difficult for Salikhov to land takedowns on him with just those kind of singular entries and no chain wrestling to back it up if Medic shuts down that initial entry, which he's very likely to do, because with Medic's striking background, he's pretty good at reading those entries. So in terms of how these two match up on the feet, Salikhov is still pretty technical at this stage in his career. Even though he's 40 years old, he still moves well. He's still pretty technical. The three areas Salikhov has declined in: the first is he's not as aggressive as he used to be. The second is he slows down now as fights wear on. And the third is he's not quite as sharp as he used to be. Not quite as explosive, not quite as sharp, not quite as good defensively. So Medic is a dangerous striker, true legit knockout power. Throws a decent volume of strikes, a much higher volume of strikes than Salikhov. And at this stage in his career, his reflexes, his speed, his accuracy, everything's just going to be that bit better. So there are two major weaknesses with Medic. He slows down a lot as fights wear on, and his ground game is really bad. Whether Salikhov will be able to exploit either of those weaknesses, though, it's pretty unlikely, to be fair, just because Salikhov doesn't grapple very much. So he's not going to be able to exploit Medic's bad ground game. And Salikhov also doesn't fight at a particularly high pace. He's more of a counter striker. So it's not like he's going to be one of these guys that's going to come forward, make Medic work very hard and wear him down. For me, I've got to lean towards Medic in this one, just simply because in a stand-up fight, you've got to go with a guy that lands 62% more strikes. At the end of the day, it's going to be very difficult for Salikhov to match the volume and the work rate of Medic and outpoint him. When your opponent is landing 60% more strikes per minute, that adds up over 15 minutes and will be very, very difficult for Salikhov to win a decision when Medic has that kind of edge in the volume. So for me, Medic likely takes this. He's got a huge advantage when it comes to the percentage of strikes or the number of strikes landed per minute, and he's 8 years younger than Salikhov. It's a young man's sport. As we can see in my written breakdown, Father Time is absolutely undefeated. This is a young man's sport, and we put it in there somewhere. I would expect Uros Medic to get this a very good percentage of the time. So in terms of the over-under on this one, I think the over-under should be in the even money odds range. Wow, fight ends inside the distance is 1.15. I wouldn't be surprised if this one went to a decision. And I do love the over 1.5 rounds. The reason being, both these guys are very technical strikers. And when you get two very technical strikers go up against one another, sometimes you get a chess match. Yes, Medic is very aggressive, but he may show Salikhov a lot of respect, and they just have kind of like a nice back and forth kickboxing match. I understand if you look at Medic's record, the vast majority of his fights end in round one, and it's very rare for him to go to a decision. And if you look at Salikhov's record, a lot of his fights end inside the distance as well, but he does tend to go to a decision every once in a while. And this could be a chess match where they both show each other a lot of respect. So I actually quite like over 1.5 rounds at dog odds, and I will probably bet that. And I think you should too. 2.40 plus 140. There's a decent amount of value there, in my opinion. I quite like that. These guys could show each other a lot of respect, and it's like a nice friendly kickboxing match, and they chip away at one another. And they've both got a reason as well. They've both got a reason to start slower. So Medic has slowed down in the past. So, he might not want to come out the gate super hard. He might want to pace himself, start a little bit slower. And on top of that, Salikhov is getting older, so he's going to be more gun shy. Also potentially want to pace himself. So, yeah, I do like that over. Most likely outcome is probably going to be Medic by decision, and the odds are very generous. 8.0 plus 700. I quite like that, guys. There's decent value. The odds are off on this fight. There's a couple nice props, like nice over and a nice prop there on Medic to win by decision. Those odds are generous. Obviously, it's not super likely. You're not going to win bets like this a super high percentage of the time, so don't be betting your rent money on it. But in this odds range, 8.0 plus 700, you don't need to win many of those bets to earn a good profit long term. Very, very generous in my opinion. So hope you found that useful. Let's move on to the next. Now let's break down the fight between Chris Padilla and Ismail Bonfim. So there's been big odds movement on this fight in the last 8 hours. Bonfim was a much bigger favourite than this, but he missed weight by £5, which has now moved the odds into the even money odds range. Bonfim is still the favourite at an average of about 1.74, which is minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%, compared to Padilla, who's a 2.12 underdog which is plus 112 for an implied probability of 47%. So last week we saw big odds movement on the Bulgarian fight. When we see big odds movement like this, the fighter that the odds improved on almost always loses. In this instance, though, the information is kind of out of the world, right? We know Bonfim missed weight by 5 pounds, whereas with Bulgarian and situations that crop up where you often see big odds movement, usually we don't find out the reasons or what's going on until after the fact. With Bonfim, we know the reason for this odds movement could be as simple as the 5 pound weight miss. Are people betting based on the on the weight miss, or has kind of insider information got out and news broke about Bonfim maybe being sick or injured coming into this fight, and has that then had a cascading effect where people kind of jump on the odds movement and follow the odds movement, thinking something could be going on here with Bonfim like it was with Bulgarian last week. Who knows? But either way, both these guys are a lot more uncertain now without knowing the reason for that Bonfim weight miss. In actual fact, I did check before I started recording these videos if there was any reason, like any news that broke that Bonfim missed weight, and I couldn't find anything. But I have been sat here recording videos for about an hour now, so we will see if there's any news is broken. It doesn't look like any news is broken. Doesn't look like it. No, it doesn't. Doesn't look like it. It's just a weight miss. It don't seem to have any news about it. Okay, just wanted to quickly check. So if we take a look at the actual weigh-in, this is not the actual weigh-in, but this is shortly after the actual weigh-in where they did the face-offs. Let's take a look at Bonfim. So he's walking out here. He's walking fine. Now, when the camera zooms in, you can see that his face is quite drawn out. Look at his eyes, look at his cheekbones. So he is quite drawn out. So he clearly tried hard to make weight. So the fact he tried hard to make weight and still miss weight by 5 pounds isn't good. A lot of the time when these guys miss weight by as much as 5 pounds, they don't really look drawn out or sucked out or anything like that, but Bonfim does. So he must have been coming into the fight quite big. It looks like he still went through a tough weight cut. So the fact he still missed by 5 pounds is kind of wild. So that adds a layer of uncertainty to no matter who you bet on this fight, because if you bet on Padilla, you're taking a risk because he's now fighting a bigger man, which may not have pushed himself as hard to cut weight as he usually does for a fight, which means he may come in with more energy and look more physically imposing and more explosive and better than ever before. Bonfim is a guy that relies a lot on explosiveness. He is very athletic, so not having to push himself and kill himself to cut that extra 5 pounds could give him a huge edge this weekend, and Bonfim might look better than ever. On the flip side, missing weight by 5 pounds is a lot, so that could be a sign that he's sick or tired or injured, and so that adds a layer of risk to betting on Bonfim. So with me personally, when a fighter misses weight, I think it's 50-50. Could be good, could be bad. So I just prefer not to bet on it and to just see what happens. And try not to gamble too much on fights like this. So this one is a pass for me. But for those of you that want to bet it, I will break it down for you now from a stylistic point of view. But just know it doesn't really matter what I say now about how these two match up stylistically. The weight miss is a big unknown, which kind of shakes our edge up and makes this research a lot less reliable. So you can see they're both about the same age, both about the same size. Let's go through the stats. So Bonfim lands almost 40% strikes more per minute, which is huge. He is very aggressive, though he does fight at a very high pace. We saw from Padilla in his last fight against Jay Herbert that he does like to stand back, counter strike a little more. He's not as aggressive. So if we take a look at the accuracy, they're both about same accuracy. Bonfim's far better defensively, 13% better defensively, but you can see they both kind of mix it up and go for takedowns every once in a while. Both have very good takedown defense. In terms of the strike distribution chart, though, this is very interesting. Padilla throws an abnormally huge volume of his strikes to the legs, so 33%, well above average. Bonfim has that major power with his boxing, so he's more into headhunting, but very, very good fight. And you can see that Padilla mixes striking up a lot more. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, if we just take the whole weight issue out of the equation and just focus on what we know about both guys based on past performances, Bonfim is better than Padilla everywhere. He hits a lot harder, he's more aggressive, throws a higher volume of strikes. He is deadly on the feet, nice combinations, and can go pretty hard as well. His cardio is better than his brother's. On top of that, his grappling strong, physically imposing, and difficult to hold down. So Padilla, has a tough fight in front of him here. Obviously, if Bonfim is compromised, injured, or has had a bad weight cut, or is sick, then Padilla's chances of winning this fight go up a lot. But I still lean towards Bonfim, and I think Bonfim will get the job done this weekend. He's very, very likely to win, in my opinion, because he just has the edge over Padilla everywhere. Now, if we look at the over-under on this one, we can see that it's in the even money odds range as to where it goes, whether or not it goes the distance or not. So if we come back to the research tool and we look at Padilla's record, you can see that it's very rare this guy goes to a decision. He's only been to a decision once in his last 6 fights. That was his last fight against Jay Herbert. And if we look at Bonfim's record, you can see that quite a lot of his fights end inside the distance as well, although prior to coming to the UFC he was a bit of a decisionator. So what we saw from Padilla in his last fight against Herbert is he kind of tried to avoid engaging. He just kind of circled around on the outside, avoided engaging, and didn't really engage too much on the feet. He's not going to be able to do that against Bonfim because of how aggressive Bonfim is, which is another one of the reasons why I like Bonfim in this one, because if Bonfim gets in Padilla's face, pushes a pace, makes it a real nasty war, then I don't think Padilla's got the power in his hands to kind of back Bonfim up and get respect in there, or back him up in general and stop him from coming forward and being the aggressor. So Bonfim has a huge edge in this one. I think he wins. In terms of the over-unders, is it more likely to go the distance or not? With how Bonfim fights, it's more likely to end inside the distance because he constantly tries to draw you into big exchanges and forces you to engage. And when you have that kind of fighter, a finish is always likely because he's going to be initiating action, and ultimately only takes one clean hard shot to land to put someone away. Maybe Bonfim lands it, maybe it's a big counter. So I would lean more towards it to end inside the distance, but I won't be betting that. In terms of most likely outcomes, what's Bonfim? So Bonfim by decision, odds are terrible. Bonfim by knockout or TKO, not that great either. I would give them a miss. Hope you found that useful. Let's move on to... Now let's break down the fight between Christian Leroy Duncan and Marco Tulio, which is a brilliant fight. This could easily main event a fight night card in Brazil, and I'm really looking forward to this one. So Tulio is the favourite at 1.54 odds, which is minus 185 for an implied probability of 65%. Christian Leroy Duncan is a 2.47 underdog, which is plus 147 for an implied probability of 41%. So this is a striker versus striker matchup. Neither of these guys ever tried to take their opponents down, and we should get a stand-up fight here. So let's take a look at the stats and let's take a deep dive into this one. So they're both about the same age. You can see that Duncan has a 5-inch reach advantage and a slight height and leg reach advantage. So when you compound these 3 size advantages together, it's very nice. We know Duncan likes to use his length and fight long. That will give him a bit of an edge over Tulio when it comes to that reach advantage, just because Tulio is much more of a boxer that stands flat-footed and kind of wants to fight you in a phone booth. Duncan can use his length and his footwork and his movement to chip away at Tulio in a way we're hoping Randy Brown does to Gabriel Bonfim. So in terms of the stats, you can see that Tulio lands 60% more strikes per minute on average, but it is worth noting that the sample size of data from Tulio's fights is much smaller than Duncan's, and so the striking stats are not too useful on this one because Duncan has fought a much higher level of opponent. In terms of the takedown offense, though, you can see Duncan very difficult to take down. Aside from that, The only thing we should focus on is the strike distribution chart, where again both guys are very similar. You can see they mix it up nicely. You know, they're not the kind of strikers that just headhunt. They do mix it up and go a lot to the legs and the body. These fighters are both above average when it comes to the number of strikes they land to the legs and body, and that's very good because it sets up the head strikes and it shows they both have a real big diversity of attacks. So neither of these guys ever tried to take their opponents down, so it's very likely we're going to get a stand-up fight here. And in a stand-up fight, it comes down to the power, the aggression, the volume of Tulio versus the technical footwork movement and better defense of Duncan. So Tulio is like a berserker in the octagon. He's technical, don't get me wrong, but he's much more aggressive and hits much more harder than Duncan. Duncan's a real technician. He's a sniper that likes to dance around you, use his length, and chip away at you from a safe distance, whereas Tulio wants to walk forward and drag you into a war, and he's very good in that kind of fight. You know, we saw him go to war with Trey Sean and look absolutely brilliant in the process. So for me personally, finding it difficult to lean either way on this fight. For me, Tulio is kind of unproven. He's only had a couple fights in the UFC, whereas Duncan, we've seen him face a decent level of opponent. For me, I think Tulio's aggression, his power, the fact he's going to be landing the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots, the reason why I would go towards Tulio. I think it's harder for Duncan to win rounds because he's more of a point fighter. When you come up against someone like Tulio that's really going to do damage and land big hard shots, that style tends to please the judges more. And in the apex, in a smaller octagon, Duncan's not going to have as much room to move around Tulio and use that footwork and movement to stay out of a range where Tulio can force him to fight in a phone booth, which is where Tulio wants to be. He wants to brawl. So I do lean towards Tulio, but not with a huge amount of confidence, and I certainly won't be betting this one. In terms of the over-under, it's tough. It is tough because just like with Bonfim, Tulio is a guy that does initiate action and he does initiate exchanges. And whenever you get a guy like Tulio that will drag you into exchanges, you're always reasonably likely to get a finish because either he's going to eat a big counter and get knocked out, or he's going to put a lot of pressure on Duncan, land a bomb and knock him out. So I would lean towards the fight not to go to a decision. I won't be betting it, but that would be my lean. Even though if we look at Duncan's record, you can see he's been to a decision in 2 of his last 3, and looks like he's going to start to go to a decision more as he faces this step up in competition. In terms of the props, I think Tulio by decision is the most likely outcome. And where is Tulio by decision? I can't wait to launch the new odds comparison tool that I've built so that we don't have to mess around trying to find the bet we want. Where is Tulio by decision? You could probably see it. Oh, there we go. Yeah, the odds are terrible, so I would give that a miss. So I hope you found that useful. My lean is Tulio, not with any amount of confidence. Let's move on. Now let's explain the reasons why I think Ricky Simón is a very good bet this weekend. Now his odds have declined by about 10% since I recommended a bet on him earlier on in the week, but if you haven't bet Ricky yet, I still think he's a pretty good bet at these odds, so don't worry about jumping in. I think he wins this a very high percentage of the time. So we'll start off by looking at the current odds, just because, well, if you've already bet Ricky based on what I recommended in our Discord group, it doesn't really matter, does it? You're probably just watching this now thinking, do I still bet Ricky at these odds? So I'm going to answer that question. So he's a 1.56 favourite, which is going to be minus 179 for an implied probability of 64%. If we take a look at the odds on Barcelos, he's a 2.46 underdog, which is going to be plus 146 for an implied probability of 41%. So let's look at the fighter comparison tool. So we can see that Ricky Simón is 5 years younger than Barcelos, which isn't a huge age gap. But age is pretty significant in a fight like this because at 33 years old, Simón is still in his prime, whereas Barcelos at 38 years old is at that stage in his career where he's going to be declining a lot from fight to fight. And we are seeing decline in Barcelos. So that 5-year age gap does give Simón pretty big statistical advantage. They're both about the same size, nothing too major going on there. But when it comes to the striking and grappling stats, that's where things start to get very interesting. So Barcelos, even though he's very well rounded, in the context of this fight, he's the striker and Simón is the grappler. And in order for Simón to win this fight, he's going to have to impose his grappling on Barcelos and have success with his grappling. We can see Barcelos lands 66% more strikes per minute, which is huge. That gives him a big edge on the feet. and it shows in numbers how difficult this fight is for Simone if he can't get the fight to the ground. Barcelos is slightly more accurate. Simone a little bit better defensively, but basically nothing. But whilst Barcelos has a big advantage when it comes to striking, Simone has a big advantage when it comes to grappling. You can see he lands double the amount of takedowns that Barcelos does per 15 minutes. And 5 takedowns on average per 5 minutes is very much above average in the UFC. Simone shoots a very high volume of takedowns. We can see Barcelos isn't easy to take down, 86% takedown defense. However, we know one of the things that starts to decline as you get older is your balance. So Barcelos in 2025 doesn't have as good a takedown defense he did 3, 4, 5 years ago, and his takedown defense in 2025 certainly wouldn't be 86%. But we'll show a little bit of footage that will illustrate that point shortly. And you can see both guys, they don't really go for a whole lot of submissions on the ground. They go for control and ground and pound more. Strike distribution chart, pretty much the same. But from a betting point of view, what we're focusing on here is whether or not Ricky Simone is going to be able to get the fight to the ground and keep the fight on the ground for long enough to win this fight. And that's really the only question that we need to be asking ourselves. So if we bring up the stats on this one, what we can see is Ricky Simone shoots a very high volume of takedowns per fight in the majority of his fights. And this is very, very, very important to understand the reasons why I think Ricky Simone is a very good bet. So if we go all the way back in Ricky Simone's career, all the way back to when he made his debut against Merab Dvalishvili. So he shot 7 takedowns against Dvalishvili. Only landed 2 of them, but 7 takedowns is a lot. In his next fight against Montel Jackson, he shot 20 takedowns, which is a huge amount of takedowns. You're entering Dvalishvili territory with those kind of numbers. 5 takedowns against Yaya. 16 takedowns against Rob Font. 16 takedowns is a huge number. 11 takedowns, 10 takedowns, 9 takedowns, 8 takedowns, 9 takedowns, 13 takedowns against Mario Bautista, 11 against Vinicius Oliveira, only 3 against Basharat, but that fight ended in 4 minutes. He would have been on track to land about 9 takedowns in that fight if he kept it up, and 10 takedowns in his last fight against Cameron Smotherman. So what these numbers show is that Simone attempts an above average number of takedowns per fight. In a lot of his fights, he really does commit very hard to the takedown, and he's very persistent with the chain wrestling. Now, what these statistics also show us is that Simone's not having a lot of success when he does shoot these takedowns. Only 3 out of 10, only 1 out of 3, only 2 out of 11, only 2 out of 13, 2 out of 9, 2 out of 8. You know, these are not good percentages from Simone. It shows that he's shooting a lot of takedowns and he's not getting rewarded for it. He's exerting a lot of energy to get those takedowns, but he's only completing a very small percentage of them. But that's not all bad, because when you're dealing with someone like Ronnie Barcelos, who we know at 38 years old will slow down a lot as fights wear on, the key to beating a guy like Ronnie Barcelos is to make him work very hard early so that he kind of struggles in the second half of the fight to defend himself. And we saw him slow in the second half of the fight against Peyton Talbot. We've seen him slow in the second half of the fight against Kyler Phillips. And at 38 years old, it's no surprise that an aging Brazilian is going to slow as the fight wears on. And so Ricky Simone has the exact style which can cause Barcelos problems, because Ricky Simone can spam takedowns for 3 rounds without getting tired. And even though he doesn't land the majority of those takedowns, just by forcing Barcelos to exert energy to defend so many of those takedowns, is really going to tire Barcelos out a lot. So in the second half of the fight, Barcelos' striking won't be anywhere near as effective, and you could start to see Simone have a bit of success on the feet. And also, secondly, his takedown defense isn't going to be as effective either, which will then make it easier for Simone to get his wrestling game going. So there have been the odd fight here and there where Simone hasn't committed super hard to his grappling, but if he commits super hard to his grappling in this one, he should win very, very easily. And if you are familiar with Ronnie Barcelos' style, you will know. If you're familiar with Ronnie Bar. Sorry, let me get my words out. If you're familiar with Ricky Simone's style, you'll know that his grappling, for the most part, is absolutely relentless in the majority of his fights. So I just want to show you in this matchup how much success an inexperienced Mexican striker has against Barcelos just over a year ago, back in February 2024. So what I want you to do is just pay attention to, you know, these positions up against the cage. We'll skip forward a bit. So they're battling for position a lot up against the cage. You can see Quinones sticking to Barcelos like glue. Like I say, Barcelos' balance isn't as good as it used to be. And we know, very similar to Dvalishvili, Ricky Simón is a guy that likes to get to that body lock and just stick to you like glue, wet blanket you and ride you from back control. So we can see Quinones is getting to that body lock position quite easily here. And Barcelos isn't offering up too much resistance. He's just allowing Quinones to control him with this body lock. And obviously in these positions, when you've got Barcelos and you're controlling him like this and you're wearing on him and you're forcing him to carry a body weight, you know, a 38-year-old Brazilian is going to get pretty tired in positions like this. And this is the position that Ricky Simón is going to be looking for very early on. This is the position Ricky Simón can persistently attack with for 15 minutes. And even though Ricky Simón doesn't land the majority of takedowns that he attempts, Ricky Simón is very active with the chain wrestle. And so even though here Quinones isn't landing takedowns, he is controlling Barcelos and wearing him out, which is something that Ricky Simón is very good at doing. So for me, I just think Ricky Simón can have a lot of success with this position that Quinones is having success with here. This is only in the first round. In this first round, Barcelos should be at his best, his freshest, his strongest. So the fact that a Mexican striker like Quinones, who's nowhere near the level of MMA grappler that Ricky Simón is having so much success controlling Barcelos in this position, is a very positive sign for Ricky Simón having a bunch of success in this fight with his MMA grappling. And even here you can see, even though you can see Barcelos still has that explosiveness to hit those throws and takedowns, Barcelos doesn't have the physicality anymore to win these scrambles to the extent that, you know, a Mexican striker like Quinones is winning these scrambles. So it's a very good stylistic matchup for Ricky Simón. I think this round is the best round I found illustrating how big of an edge Simón could have on the ground. And this round is perfect for illustrating that because it's round one. So Barcelos is fresh. He hasn't been hurt. Barcelos' defensive wrestling should be its absolute best in this first round against a Mexican striker. Yeah, he kind of got handled there. And we know Simón is levels and levels and levels and levels and levels above Quinones on the ground. So imagine how much success Simón could have with his grappling. So I think Simón wins this a very high percentage of the time. In terms of the over-under though, I do think it's very likely to go to a decision. You can see that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of Barcelos' last 10 have gone to a decision. And if you look at Simón's record, 1, 2, 3, 3 of his last 4 have gone to a decision as well. If we take a look at the odds though, where are the odds? Where are they? Where are they? Where are they? Let's bring them up here. You can see that the fight is pretty steep favourite odds to go to decisions. That doesn't appeal to me too much, just because at 38 years old, Barcelos isn't going to be anywhere near as durable as he used to be, and you'd be paying an implied probability of about 65% on those odds. In terms of the most likely outcomes for the props, I would say Ricky Simón by decision, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so I would give that a miss. But I very much hope you found that useful. I hope Simón comes through for us this weekend. I also hope you join the live betting group, because we make a profit on the vast majority of events, and if you join my live betting group, the membership pays for itself. So what are you waiting for? Come join the team. You'll absolutely love it. But for now, have a great weekend. Hope you make loads of money. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.